Squeanakoi, Ayukui, Nekna Maggie Peters. Hello, good morning. My name is Maggie Peters, and welcome to Integrating Native Language and Values into Schoolwide Expectations. I am currently the Native American Studies Model Curriculum Learning Specialist at the Humboldt County Office of Education, and I am joined today with Noah Van Horn. Do you want to introduce yourself, Noah?
Absolutely. I'm Noah Van Horn. I am a school psychologist, a PBIS coach with the Springfield School District, and I work as a trainer for the Northwest PBIS Network. I'm here as Maggie's support person, but really she's the star of the show, so I'll let her take over.
Yay, just a little bit of a quick background too. I am also the secretary on the board of the Northwest PBIS, and I absolutely fell in love with this organization. And I think that everything that you all are doing in your schools and in your districts to uplift positive behavior intervention and supports, to me, I feel like this can be the trauma informed practice of your school district, as long as you are approaching it, in a way that is culturally sustaining. And so I'm hoping to give you some ideas about culturally sustaining your PBIS in this presentation, starting with your expectations. So, a little bit about the school that I would like to share about today. Before I came to the county office to work on model curriculum for the state, I was an administrator and an educator on the Hoopa Valley Reservation in Northwest California. The Hoopa Valley Reservation, the school there that I served at was a pre-K through eighth grade school, and primarily Alaska Indian, American Indian and Alaska Native population, but specifically Yurok, Karuk, and Hoopa peoples. So very high percentage of Native population. And with that also, the area is pretty socioeconomically disadvantaged, higher suspension rates and higher chronically absent rates in that school. So when we were learning, part of what I did in my teaching role there is I got to shift to being a MTSS coach. And when I was able to be that coach for a couple of years, I took a deep dive into PBIS and really wanted to start with tiered supports around behavior. So prior to that work, I could say that I was introduced to PBIS through maybe our school psychologist or our school administrators, but I would say that in an area that's very rural and remote, we had a very high turnover of school leadership and staff members. And so really, it felt like we didn't ever really implement PBIS the way after I got all the coaching in the correct way. And so I was able to provide that additional support to administrators to kind of scale it down a little bit and approach this work with a lot more, I guess we'd use the words buy-in, but a lot more collaboration in developing it. Noah, do you want to do this slide?
I would love to. So within the tiered fidelity inventory, we now have TFI 3.0. And if you haven't taken a deep dive into it, it's got expanded scoring. But the main point here is that when schools have positively stated social, emotional, behavioral expectations, it gives us that common language, the common focus, and allows for more equitable practices within our building. And so as Maggie's going to go through her presentation and talk, she'll probably expand out beyond just school-wide expectations, but touching on this as an anchor point for schools to make sure that all students know what's expected of them when they're walking into the building, when they're in the classroom, and when they're interacting in various places throughout the school.
Yeah, and really your school-wide expectations for me and the work that I did at Hoopa Elementary School really was an indicator, it sets the tone for everything. It sets the tone for school climate and everything that leads from that. So as I approached working with our tier one team, we started to really think about like, what are our values? Like, who are we? What is the values of the community? And really, we understood that the values of the community are based upon reciprocity, respect, and responsibility. We at the time had been doing art. We were a Turnaround Art School. So that was an initiative that started with the Michelle Obama. And we were one of the kind of second round of turnaround art schools they brought in California. And so we had already started branding our school around art practices of being in balance, being in control of our bodies, and having focused minds, and really started branding around like Hoopa Brave scholars, right? So we wanted to make sure that we didn't abandon the work that we had already done around branding, but we also wanted to include things that we thought were very important about the culture of Native American population on the reservation. And so that also included this idea of community and collective care, right? So not individual, there was not a practice of uplifting individuals. It was more of a practice of acknowledging community. We also acknowledged that in Northern California, the genocide of the indigenous people in this population is fairly recent. It happened in the gold rush in the 1860s. And so there was just this mass, very fast assimilation process that happened on the reservation. And even in the place where the school resided was a boarding school, right? So, we understood that these people have experienced a lot of trauma, and also with that trauma, all of this resilience and really emphasizing strength in the people. So we wanted to include that in our expectations. And again, this sense of balance and well-being as Native American people. And I want to kind of introduce this topic through a lens of Native practices, but I want you to see this as a guideline that can support any cultural sustainability practices within your PBIS. So this is just an example. And so for Native people in our area, we have a strong belief system around living in balance with the natural world, living in balance with one another, and emphasizing a need for well-being. And so we wanted to make sure that that was also a foundation of our work. Also giving voice and agency to students and the community, that we were understood the amount of trust and the time it takes to build trust with a population who have been that their educational experience in schools has been cultural erasure, has been trauma, has been abuse. And so how do we as educational partners first approach this population so that we can build the trust in order for them to move forward in a good way and feel like we are coming from an authentic space? And so that ultimately led to integrating trauma-informed practices over this idea of control over students, right? And we were able to kind of look at the next steps, right? So when we looked at these expectations that are rooted in our cultural values of being balanced, resilient, accepted, valued, and engaged, what we came up with, was our behavior expectations. So we happened to be the Hoopa Braves. The Hoopa, that was our mascot. And so we went through several iterations of like, what could we brand these 3 to 5 expectations on? And what we landed, like we were kind of thinking tribe, braves, different things like that. And we landed on braves. So balanced, resilient, accepting, valued, and engaged. Balance came from some of that art integration work of having a calm body, balanced emotions, focused minds, that resiliency. We really definitely wanted to build growth mindset with our students and have them understand that learning requires mistake making, right? And that is a part of the process, and that, we had to integrate social emotional learning in that process, because making mistakes sometimes feels oogie. It doesn't feel good to get things wrong, right? But we really wanted to make sure that students had an opportunity to develop that self-compassion as they're learning. Being accepting and valued, we wanted to make sure that students felt like that their perspective was being honored and that they approached interactions with one another with empathy and inclusion. And obviously, I think engaged is very common, this idea of being active participants and taking responsibility for their learning. We also wanted to make sure that we had very visible components of our daily routines that reinforced these behavior expectations. And so, what I have here is our morning blessing. And so, we would have the principal, or maybe students, or the Hoopa language instructor kind of get on the announcements all at the same time. So, it was a school-wide thing where we kind of paused what we were doing in our classrooms to listen to the morning announcements. And it started with Nuwong out that. Iktilio kahanai. De genis no hot denatai. Right. And so in that was kind of like this affirmation experience where I am well, we appreciate our ancestors, or we're bringing our ancestors into our day of learning, right? And that we want to make sure that we're going forward in a good way, and to make sure that we're honoring our ancestors today and our families. So this really set the tone for the day. But again, that foundation is these behavior expectations. Another aspect of our morning routine was the Hoopa Braves Pledge. So we didn't do the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States. We came up with our own that really kind of infused not just our, specifically our behavior expectations of Braves, but kind of set that tone of, as a Hoopa Brave scholar, I am special. I pledge to be safe, responsible, and respectful. By learning lessons from my past, we will make sure our traditions last. Social rules are important to me. We help each other be bully free. I come to school to learn each day, doing my best in a resilient way. Respect is the foundation for all my actions, making strong choices to control my reactions. Honoring my ancestors is at my core, to be good people, so I will soar. Proud of who I am, being the best I can. And this pledge really did come from members of the Tier 1 team. We were just like, how do we get our students, right, to kind of make these commitments to one another? And we found that this pledge was really powerful in doing that. So just like everybody else's work, you turn to then, your behavior matrix, right? And so I just kind of took a screenshot of not like the ending poster, but more of our process, right? What are the things that we really wanted to kind of communicate to students, right? So Hoopa Brave scholars are balanced, resilient, accepting, valued, and engaged. And we wanted to make sure that the language that we had on our matrix was the same exact language that we're saying when we're redirecting and when we're doing our acknowledgements. And I've included an image here of our acknowledgements, but I want to direct your attention really quickly to also these notes, right? So the wellness works. So we made it very intentional when we were teaching the behavior expectations, that we're also teaching regulation strategies for students as a trauma-informed practice, so that students knew what they could do in order to communicate to us their needs, right? So, here are some practices that you can do to regulate or co-regulate with another student. And that we are always very explicit about the things that they can expect from their educator to do. What should the educator do? The educator should be using common language, be using explicit directions, and connecting those directions to the acknowledgements and the school-wide behavior expectations, and also being self-regulated themselves, right? So these are reminders to adults that we sometimes can trigger student behavior based on our bias, based on the things that maybe we don't understand as cultural normal behavior, right? So we really had to stretch ourselves in order to make sure that we understood that our behaviors are contagious, right? Our emotions are contagious. So this is an example of our behavior acknowledgements, where we're giving the acknowledgements in the Hoopa language. Holje tiltet is the word for brave or courage in the Hoopa language. And Nuwong outtet means she is in a good way. So we would say, oh, here's your Holje tiltet ticket, Nuwong octe, right? So you're recognizing that they are coming, that they're behaving in the way that that they have agreed to, right? And you could see, you can give that check mark there, and set diet means thank you, or that we're going to go together in a good way. I also, kind of did something for adults. This is just a little screenshot of our behavior tracking form. And the people that we were working with to design our program really like discouraged this because they're like, well, there's not really anything in Swiss that you can kind of that's going to be helpful here. But for me, it was really important to put this section of a trauma response, right? I felt like it was important as an adult person to just reflect briefly, like, could this behavior be a response to trauma? Because I think that it puts you in a different mindset when you are keeping track of behaviors. Because to me, it kind of made me have less of a mindset around maybe being like a little annoyed with the behavior or kind of like, I feel like I'm doing all these things and the behavior isn't changing, but there could be something different going on, right? There could be something that this is a trauma response and that I need to proceed with supports for my student that could be trauma based, right? And it really gives you just this opportunity to pause and reflect is this escaping behavior because of a trauma or is this attention behavior because of a trauma? Sorry, I forgot I animated that. Because I'm no longer in the school, it's harder for me to kind of give you an update of where we are. But I did want to leave some notes or some ideas to support you in engaging in this work. And so part of this is thinking about your behavior expectations with regards to the impacts to the overall school climate, right? So your intentions are to increase a sense of belonging because we want to improve attendance and reduce that chronic absentee. We want to improve student behavior and engagement through affirmation of cultural identity and strength. So think deeply about the cultures of the students at your schools. Work with agencies in your community that uplift the cultures of those schools. Learn about ways that you can integrate that culture into your PBIS. Obviously, we want to reduce the discipline and exclusionary practices. And there might be really specific ways that those interventions that reduce discipline and exclusionary are culturally based, right? So how do you come together? Are you using circles or that practice of that is an indigenous practice, right? That restorative circles. Are you using other activities that reflect the cultures of your students for coming together and communicating and resolving conflict? We want to increase that stronger relationships across campus, and that's requires trust. It requires students feeling safe, and it takes a huge commitment of educators to use that common language. And if that language does infuse cultural aspects, for that to be okay. It's okay for educators to have to stretch themselves to learn something new because we're in service to these students and it's not about us. It's about making sure that those students feel safe. And that way, staff are consistent and using clarity with their language. And that we're also supporting that social, emotional, and mental health needs of our students. So those considerations that go along with each one is, we want to make sure that, if we are in those schools where there is high turnover, that we're building tools so that if the leadership changes or if we have a high turnover in staff, that maybe we're designing curriculum around our PBIS that just stays with first grade, that stays with second grade, that stays with eighth grade, right? And that those resources will always be available no matter who is in that room or who is in charge of that school. And that takes a little bit of work, but I think that it's well worth it. What we did at Hoopa Elementary School is that we designed Google Slide presentations for implementation and grade level specific kind of activities or worksheets or games that went along to learn those expectations. You want to make sure that there is, again, that kind of consistent cultural alignment in your PBIS, and that you approach professional development like you are in perpetual year one, right? I know that that is a heavy lift and it kind of feels like, especially if you're a teacher who's been in that school for a long time, like we've done this already, I don't want to use my time. You really have to think about your colleagues and that this is a whole school implementation. This is a whole school commitment. And so you have to make that whole school journey together, and you'll learn and grow every single time you engage in that professional learning, and you might see yourself eventually becoming a leader on your campus, and promoting and continuing to grow, especially the cultural resources of the cultural resource component of your PBIS. Obviously, we want to be using that strength-based mindset and building authentic community partnerships, and really figuring out how we can go beyond culturally sustaining practices, go beyond our PBIS, and see it in how we approach social emotional learning, how we approach our mental health, how we approach all the components that really need to be aligned in order for PBIS and MTSS to be successful on your campus. So this would be the time for Q&A. I don't know if anybody has any questions or if you have any questions, Noah, but thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate you, and you're welcome to reach out to me if you would like to have more information about culturally sustaining practices in your positive behavior intervention and supports program.